can use that system. So please, if you'd like to care to ask some questions, and perhaps if we just keep the answers a little bit short so we can all have a go. Okay. Yes, the lady at the back. Thank you. Just introduce yourself and say your name, please. And if you're from a school, just say what school you are from.
Hi, I'm Diann Rodgers-Healey. I'm from High School. This is a bit off topic, but in a predominantly white society, how come we witness racial discrimination?
So the question was, in a predominantly white society, how can we reduce racial discrimination? Was it gender discrimination or racial? Racial discrimination, especially against women.
I'll have a go at answering that. That wasn't a joke, by the way. I think for me, I mean, we've all dealt with racial discrimination no matter what background we come from. I don't think it's specific to a group of people. Ideally in Australia, Aboriginal people have been, I guess, oppressed by racism. But I feel in today's society, it's more about education. I think, first and foremost, just understanding one another. I don't feel that there's one group of people or race of people that are better than any other race of people. We are all unique as human beings. I believe education is the first step to lowering racial discrimination. That's what I believe.
I'd like to affirm Rochelle's call for education, and on top of that, I'd like to say a lot depends on ourselves, how we handle the external environment, and for us to find that inner strength in us. It is inevitable. I think we deal with a lot of racial discrimination, and particularly to our gender, but I don't think I don't have to live in that world. I can choose to live in my world of joy and my world of faith in humanity, that it will always get better. And first, I build up that resilience, and I don't want to live in any negative emotions. I want to transform that negative emotion into strength so that I can partner with other organizations and other communities, bring people together so that we can prove to other people, those who discriminate against us, that we can do something for them and into their benefit. And slowly, I think, step by step. I'm a small wheel. If you think of a small cog wheel, I'm very small, but I can turn a middle wheel, and together with a few other middle wheels together, we can turn that big wheel. Thank you.
I just want to say, I think it's absolutely correct that education is so important. I've never suffered racial discrimination, and I completely don't understand it. I really don't. I think if in your heart you have a value that says, you know, the things that I think we're pretty much all brought up with. You can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Have manners, be considerate of others. How on earth can you treat somebody poorly based on their race or their gender or their disability? I just don't get it. And so all I wanted to intervene and say was, please call it out when you see it. Don't tolerate it in your families and your communities, because it is just simply hurtful and debilitating, and it should never be accepted. And I think, you know, it's one of those things, Jenny and I have just been through a week in Parliament where people are trying to water down the Racial Discrimination Act. I mean, and people have said, what do they want to say? And there's no answer to that, because whatever they're saying they want to say, I think is unacceptable. And so I just wanted to endorse, let's all not accept it ever. Okay.
I'd like to say that I think discrimination comes about when one person judges another person. And I think it's impossible to judge another person unless you've walked in their shoes. You have to walk their walk to know what their journey's been like, what their values are. And if their values are not the same as yours, well then you have to respect that they have a right to have their own values. And yes, discrimination just is really, I think it's about judging people. We're not really in a position to judge people. Thank you.
I think perhaps as a predominantly white nation, I think that what we are in the position to do is to acknowledge that that is a fact and that nothing else can happen if we don't acknowledge that that is a position that we do have and that there is change that we can have and that we can lead to do. Yeah. So in debating, for example, we have a tournament just for women and it's called like an Australasian tournament. And last year it was held in Melbourne. There was one person from an Asian institution there, and it was a genuine tragedy to me. And we raised it at council and said, no one from an Asian institution has come this year because we exclude them so much, even in our an average attempt to what we think is inclusion. But as a group of predominantly white women, we need to acknowledge that we're privileged and use that privilege that we do have to help those people to come to this tournament, because we can't call it an Australasian tournament if people from Asia aren't coming. We've only ever held it in an Australian city. That's just wrong. We need to acknowledge that we're doing that and we need to start to change. And if we want to make programs that are inclusive, we actually have to go about that in a way that is inclusive, and we need to be wary of that as individuals and groups and as a nation, because we can't end racial discrimination if on an individual level we aren't doing what we can, and if on a group level we aren't doing what we can, and that only comes if we work together and actually acknowledge the things that we can do.
I think that as a predominantly white society, we can be very, very reluctant to acknowledge the benefits that come with being white. There's a real reluctance to acknowledge that we are living on Aboriginal land, or that, like, Australia's very history and the way that government and legal institutions have been set up at the moment, and we have got progress, but at the moment predominantly benefit white people. And I think that in acknowledging that, we're able to come to a starting point for listening to people of colour and making changes to benefit them. I think there's a real reluctance to listen to people of colour, because I think when they talk about things that they've experienced in their lifetime that are disadvantages specific to race, and particularly when that intersects with gender, there's a tendency to say, be quiet, we want a unifying vision, you're kind of distracting from the main purpose of this discussion, and there's an attempt to kind of silence them. And I think it's absolutely wrong to tell people that their experiences with discrimination are kind of not what we ought to be talking about within women's movements or within society as a whole, that they lead to more division. I think that we actually need to be listening to those experiences, acknowledging that they occurred as a society and looking to how we can stop them from happening again.
Katerina, thank you for that question. I'm someone who has experienced racial discrimination all her life. I find that when I move in the circles that I move in, even today, I'm the only brown person in the room, and I often get told she doesn't speak until I do speak. They realise that I have an opinion. I also feel that in whatever I do, I make sure that there is a visibility of multicultural people in any capacity. I created the Diversity Award, a national award last year, primarily because if you look at all the awards and who are winning the awards, you don't see someone who's disabled on stage or someone of a dark skin colour. You see white women on stage, and that's great, but I think we need to be included. And so it is up to each of us to make sure we give multicultural people as say, and we and Aboriginal people as say, and disabled, and include the whole rainbow, the whole spectrum, and even in terms of sexuality as well. So thank you, Katarina. Any other questions? Yes.
Just press the green button.
Just press the green.
Is it working now? Excellent. Hello, my name is Stephanie. In light of what Jenny spoke about earlier and the fact that we have so many students in the audience today, my question is, what advice would you have for young members of the community to combat the complacency and the apathy that we spoke of on these issues?
Okay. Basically, what I would like to tell you though, don't think there's any limitations on what you can achieve. I'm living proof of that. When you're told you can't do something, you can. Always find a way. It could be hard, it could be a long road. I actually go through that on a regular basis because I help out with the Unadera Access Group. We're trying to get access at Unadera train station. Sorry about breath. That's been a long and hard slug, and I'm not going to give up. I'm going to keep going until we get that. So always make sure you put everything in, because you only get out of what you put in.
For me, like in my community, like the refugee community or the African community, and even in my family, my girls, what I continue to tell them is to always think about what is good and what you can achieve. Do you want to do this? Is it a good thing? Is it something that's going to help you and help somebody in need? And don't worry about who thinks. Like, for example, when people say to me, I'm going to be in a nursing home, I don't care who thinks. I can be in a nursing home and counsel somebody in my bed. I love to do that. I love to be in my nursing home bed and help somebody, overcome some sort of stress or whatever it is. I've gone through it. Besides going to university, I know I have the empathy and how to talk to somebody to make them to feel what I feel and put them in my shoes. So yeah, don't worry about who's looking at you, who thinks you're not beautiful. You are beautiful. Do you think you are beautiful? Yes, and that's it.
Sorry, I'll just say one thing. I think just to acknowledge our young people in the room that you are, and you do have a lot of pressure, I guess, to succeed. You know, finish high school, get a HSC. So just remembering that, you know, whoever you surround yourself with, you know, make sure it's a positive experience and don't stress too much. Once you do finish school, I believe that life then begins. There are a lot of people out there to support you, so just remember that you are unique in who you are.
Make a resolution. Remember that there is nothing that is not accomplishable. But what the resolution that we have to make is for the greater good. Across the street from here was a landfill site. But now, above that landfill site is Nantian Institute. It's a building inspired by the lotus. What does the lotus, what's the symbol of the lotus? It grows out of muddy waters. It goes straight towards the sunlight, and it draws nutriment from the mud so that it can rise above all. So may we all rise above the mud that's around us.
We've got time for one more question, someone. The lady in the dress.
I don't know that I've got a microphone, that's okay. I'm Louise. My question is prefaced a number of people who have had reason to be angry about prejudice or something some way in which they've been treated that's been unfair. That's my first observation. My second is that we all have the power to say whatever we want to, actually, through the internet these days. And my third is that recently I've had the really disturbing experience of reading Clementine Ford's book, Fighting Like a Girl. Clementine Ford is, as well as being a writer and a journalist, she's a new age, let's say, feminist. And what I found disturbing about it, and she's not the only source of this disturbance that I've witnessed recently, is that she is not just angry, but she's vicious. She's very aggressive. She wants to fight. She wants us to fight. And she doesn't really give a hoot, and they would not be her words. Quite. She doesn't give a hoot what men think or what boys think. And my question is, do you think, as a panel or as panellists, that there is a place for excluding men from the discussion about feminism? Is there a place for fighting like a girl?
I'll have a crack at answering that. Okay. I don't believe that we need to exclude men in those discussions. I 100% believe that we can't move forward unless they're involved in that discussion, that conversation. There was a statistic that I heard the other day that it's, I think, you know, to be equal in society with men, it's going to take women, I think it was 170 to 180 years. I don't want to see that happen. So to exclude men, I don't think that is a solver of the issue. We have to be inclusive with them. But having those discussions, having the right, I guess, men in those leadership roles to be able to support women, I guess, in the workplace is something we need to look at as well. But yeah, just being equal in having that conversation. So I don't believe that we should exclude men from the discussion at all.
Hello. I think we don't need to exclude men. If anything, we need to educate them and include them and try and get them on the same wavelength that we're coming from so they understand it a little bit more. But having said that, I think we can be ruthless. There is no reason why we can't be as underhand and sneaky as they are. So I think we need to fight fire with fire sometimes. So depending on the situation, I'd go for giving it on like a girl. But having said that, you need to have them men around so they get where you're coming from, because there will be no resolution to anything if we're always banging our heads against the wall, so to speak. So you want to make sure you have them on board. Thank you.
Look, I think there's some significant issues going on across our communities, and you mentioned the issue about the impact of social media, and I think there are real challenges that we do need to start to think about in that space. I don't know if it's just I'm getting older, but I am a bit disturbed about the visions of femininity and what being a woman is that I see on social media. You know, I'm a high school teacher by background, so I'm not naive about young people. I mean, young people, you know, part of maturing is going through what are relationships and how do we relate to each other. But the conversations are very divisive of people. And, you know, this whole thing about being obsessed, and I fall into the trap as a politician, you know, because you want people to like you because you want them to vote for you, you know. How many likes did I get on my post on Facebook? You know, it becomes a real issue around how we define ourselves and then how we interact with each other. So I don't underestimate many of those issues that you're raising. It also allows people with evil intent and horrible views to get a megaphone that they wouldn't have had in the past, and to join together and put views out there that I think are very worrisome. So these are real challenges that the next generation are facing in the social discourse, what that world looks like. And so I suppose for me, I think I'm never a fan of firstly getting angry. I'm not a believer that anger actually leads to constructive outcomes and action. I am a believer, as Jenny said so eloquently, on getting active, and I think that's a very different thing. And I think your movement is always more powerful the more it's inclusive. And so that would just be my response. I don't want to at all underestimate how significant those challenges are, and I absolutely get the emotion that's behind that frustration and anger. But I think get active and get inclusive would be a more powerful outcome for that.
Sharon, I concur with that sentiment and with all of what you've said. I find that when I write articles in the conversation, there are these people who go on and make very discriminatory comments. They're the trolls. They have no face, they have no name, they hide behind code names, and they tend to support each other regardless of what you write. So I've just learned to just totally ignore the comments. I don't respond to them, and I move on. But I agree with what you've said, Sharon. There was once a time where I got really upset, personally upset, and I stopped writing, and I thought, no, I'm not going to let you get to me. And it was a matter of me just doing it. But having said that, there are some women who support you on social media and stand up for you, and that's great. But I still think that it is about moving beyond that and not letting that consume you and take that space. Thank you so much for all your questions. Does anyone have an absolutely burning question they want to ask the panel? Ah, wonderful. Would you like to?
Hi, I'm Dallas. My question is, what would you like to see happen to sort of, move forward with equality? It's a big movement now, but what's going to happen in the future?
Just one thing we'd all like to see happen.
Well, personally, I think we need to see an admittance, that word, within our culture, that people who have experienced being marginalised or discrimination know the most about what it's like to be marginalised. There's a real tendency to try to tell women what it's like to be a woman, and so kind of in answer to the last question as well, men absolutely have a place in feminism, but at the same time we've got to admit that if we want to talk about women's experiences, women are the most qualified people to do that. And by the same token, if we want to talk about experiences of racism, people who are not white are most equipped to do that. And so I think it's about acknowledging differences within our community without turning them into divisive things, acknowledging that the experiences of the people who have the worst lot in society need to be fixed before we can say we have a truly equal society. I don't think it's enough simply to have, economic parity for some women or economic parity for some marginalised groups. I think that we need to ensure that we have, that we need to make sure that it's not just white women or able women or women who've been born into educated backgrounds who can access things like education and economic parity. I think we have to have a much more systemic and inclusive approach to feminism and to social equality than that.
Thank you very much. We might break for morning tea. Thank you so much to this wonderful panel. Please give them a round of applause. That we have covered every age group, and in fact I only learnt today the decade of